Hi there, I'm Zach Kircher, and you're watching Kircher Talks Entertainment. Getting to talk about movies here on YouTube is something that I find to be a genuine pleasure, especially when I get to talk about movies that nobody has ever heard of. I mean, last year I made it my entire personality to tell everyone about Hundreds of Beavers, and if you saw my video about the best movies of 2024, you'd understand why. But even then, I know there were a decent amount of people in the film community who at least knew of that movie, so it wasn't like I was the first person to talk about it. But when I say that the movie I'm going to talk to you about today in this video is so obscure that I wouldn't have heard about it myself unless a few people that I follow on Letterboxd had talked about it, then truly I would consider this to be a film that nobody had ever heard of. But I genuinely think it deserves your attention, and that movie is called Eephus.
What is that? What the is that?
Now, you're probably sitting there thinking, what in the heck is an Eephus? To be honest, I thought the same exact thing. Going into this movie, all I knew about it was that it was based on baseball. And me, I love baseball, and I love movies, and I love baseball movies. I mean, I hope that's evident in the fact that I'm wearing my Diamondbacks jersey right now. But eventually, once I came to realize why the movie is called that, everything else clicked. If you'll indulge me, I'm going to pull from a Wikipedia article that describes the type of pitch that this movie gets its name from. The delivery from the pitcher has very low velocity and often catches the hitter off guard. The Eephus pitch is thrown overhand like most pitches, but is characterized by an unusual, high-arcing trajectory. It's considered a trick pitch because, in comparison to normal baseball pitches, which run from 70 to 100 miles per hour, an Eephus pitch appears to move in slow motion at 55 miles per hour or less, sometimes as low as 35 miles per hour. Trust me when I say that there is a reason why I'm going to be harping on this point of the movie's title as much as I'm going to. Now, Eephus stands out to me both for its very unique tone and for the type of story that it's trying to tell. Unlike other baseball movies where you have stories of, people going into these big competitions, whether it's Major League sports or minor league or little league even in the case of the Bad News Bears, Eephus by comparison is a very laid back and slice of life type of story. You see, what this movie is about is you have two local teams in rural Massachusetts where they play on a semi-regular basis. They kind of just play to have fun and do it for the heck of it on random Sunday mornings and afternoons. And it's just a bunch of guys who range from in their 20s to 30s. Some are even in their 40s and the 50s. They're just kind of eclectic groups of dudes who get together to just have fun playing baseball. But the game that takes place in this particular movie is the last game that these teams are going to play against each other, because very soon the ballpark that they're going to be playing in is going to be bulldozed and turned into a middle school. And so you have this situation where all of these guys who are coming together to play this last game of baseball, and they're hoping it's going to be this huge wipeout game to end all games kind of scenario. But as the movie goes on, it doesn't really pan out that way, and I think that's kind of where it becomes interesting. Just like how an Eephus pitch sneaks up on a hitter who's at bat, this movie also sneaks up on the viewer, but perhaps not in the way you might expect. Because the thing that stood out to me about it, both in the moment of me watching it as well as in the weeks that have passed since I've watched Eephus, is its secret staying power. I mean, part of that has to do with just the setup of the movie itself, in which you have these guys who are coming together for their last game, like I said, but it doesn't really seem to have hit them at first. They're approaching it like it's business as usual, just like any other game that they've ever played. But eventually, as the day goes on, the players begin to experience a wide array of emotions beyond nostalgia. They get irritated at each other, they get frustrated, they get pissed off, things you would expect guys to do when they're engaged in sports, but it's not what you'd really expect. It's beyond the usual irritation that comes with playing sports. It's something a little bit more existential, a little bit more feral. And part of that too is the game goes on for a ridiculous amount of time. For those who may not be familiar with baseball, a full-length baseball game that, goes on for all 9 innings is typically about 2.5 to 3 hours. But with how this movie is broken up, it takes place in little segments that are hey, this segment's in the morning, this segment's in the afternoon, this segment's at dusk, and then the final segment takes place fully in the dark at night. And so with this passage of time in the movie, it's very clear that this game goes on for pretty much the entire day. Now, whether something like that would actually happen in real time is debatable, but the game being as long as it ends up being actually served the movie's narrative goal. It almost feels like these guys are taking their last game for granted as it's happening. And for me, as a guy who's now 30 and has a kid and a wife and a mortgage and all this stuff, that's very realistic to me, because for me in my life, I don't, regularly play baseball with my friends or anything, but we get together for similar guys' nights where we come together for like LAN parties to play Halo. And it's sort of a similar thing where it's sort of semi-regular, a sort of ritualistic thing at this point where we know what we want going into this thing. We enjoy it, we appreciate the good times. But there have been times where we've gotten together for these sort of things and it's like the last hurrah for one of the guys we're hanging out with. And even in those moments, it's just business as usual. We're going about our usual thing and we're enjoying it in the moment, but then suddenly, all of a sudden, it's just over. When the movies try to depict people having their last hurrah, it's always like this crazy thing where everything goes wrong or everything goes all right, and it's like either this super satisfying or super chaotic thing that happens. But life isn't like that. It's often just not quite what we expect. It's often a lot more mundane. It's very simple and just not quite what we would hope it to be. And I think Eephus with its story is very tuned in to how real life is. Whenever we plan these big things to spend time with our friends on, it never ends up being this bombastic, crazy thing. Now, I don't want to make it seem like Eephus is not a fun movie to watch, for it absolutely is. It's very enjoyable for the way it kind of settles into a laid-back hangout movie vibe as these characters play baseball together and then they throw a whole bunch of insults at each other. It very much feels like an adult version of The Sandlot in that sense, which, coming from me being a massive fan of The Sandlot, as I've talked about in a few videos on this channel, that really gave the movie an edge for me. But honestly, the dialogue, the editing, the performances especially, all make the humor in this movie feel very natural, where all of the jokes come from just the banter that these guys have from each other. And it truly has been a long time since I've laughed as much as I have watching this. At the same time, the fact that this movie is so laid back, despite the context of this being like their last game, gives the movie sort of a tinge of sadness, since it causes these players to get more annoyed and snappy at each other the longer it goes on, both for them being annoyed that it is going so long, but also because they don't seem like they want it to end. Everything adds up to this movie serving as a metaphor for how unpredictable and mundane life can be, but also for how there can be serenity in those quiet moments even when it feels mundane. Something that I've come to appreciate about baseball in my later years is that it's both unpredictable and mundane at the same time, but I think that's why it makes it the perfect sport, because you wait for those big moments and the excitement that you feel and the tension leading up to those big moments where someone gets a hit or someone steals a base or a pitcher gets a strikeout. It's very exciting in the moment, but also there's a lot of waiting around, and so it makes it kind of this paradox in a way. And the movie also feels like that too, where it is very laid back. There's not a whole lot that quote unquote happens, but I think it's one movie that you can really sink your teeth into for the dynamics of its relationships and just for how metaphorical it is. At its core, that is why Eephus works so well, for it gets baseball on an intrinsic level, and in a different sense, it gets life. That may mean that if you don't have as much of a connection to baseball as other people, this movie may not work as well for you as it did for me, but I still think that there are people who could appreciate this movie for what it is, and for the offbeat and different vibe that it's going for. It's certainly the best baseball movie that I've seen in years, both for its very unique approach to this material, for how honest it is, for the love that it has for baseball, with how beautifully this film is able to capture baseball realistically and authentically as it's happening. And like the Eephus pitch itself, this movie is very unassuming and sneaky in what it's trying to do. Once this movie's message actually hits you, it catches you off guard, and you can appreciate its very specific tone and message. It's one of the most unique baseballs I have ever seen, and it's also one of the best, and I strongly recommend it. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and subscribe to the channel, for doing so really does help my channel grow, and I will see you all in the next one.